Hello and welcome to 40 for Tea. My name's Rach Allen and we are drinking 40 cups of tea with 40 great people around the world. We're more connected than ever digitally in this new decade, yet on some level in this changing landscape, it seems we could end up more divided. So it's time to come together, to talk, listen, hear voices. In a world with so many unique perspectives, we're going to be exploring those, our unique yet not separate nature. This journey is a connective, creative, and bit messy adventure, throwing perfection out the window and trading it for realness, connection, and heart. A place to be together. Expect all it is to be human, the laughter, the tears, and the taboo. So go grab a cuppa and let's take a moment to be together. Hello. Women's stuff has been a hot topic on many of our cups of tea through season 1 and season 2. So we're bringing women to the forefront in season 3. Not surprising really, because there are so many amazing women in the world. And there's a lot that us women keep in the closet, we don't talk about. And we started slowly but surely in season 1, opening the door to conversations around bodies, periods, sex, masturbation, finding our voices, mental health, addiction, human rights, genocide, the reality of relationships, and female genital cutting, among other things. And there's a lot more to talk about. So in season 1, I spoke to Ruth Taylor, and in season 2, I spoke to multi-award-winning human rights activist Molly Melching. Both of them said you have to have a cup of tea with Julia Lala Maharaja. I hope I said that right. Julia put the little-known issue of ending female genital cutting on the global agenda for change by building the NGO, the Orchid Project, which manifested the vision of a world free of FGC. She also got an OBE. I've seen the photo of her and Prince Charles. Now look, Julia is committed to enabling change, justice and progress. And I'm absolutely chuffed to be having a cup of tea with Julia today. She has a big story. It's not just all about the things I've already said, and I can't wait to dive in deep and see what we uncover. So welcome, Julia, and do you have a cup of tea?
Yeah. Rachel, it's gorgeous to be here. Thank you so much. I do. I have my beautiful cup of,
what have you got?
One part lapsang, souchong, 2 parts assam, and soy. I've gone away from dairy, so this is my dream cup of tea.
Amazing. And how did you get that? How did you get that equation of tea?
I've been kicked out of home for nefarious deeds, and I was living in renting a room from a gorgeous friend's mum. Mm-hmm. And she was the type of mum who had a teapot on the go with, you would just keep throwing in another spoonful of lapsang or a couple of spoonfuls of assam. Mm-hmm. So that was always that memory of the cold kind of, dregs of the teapot, that it was never about the heat. It was always just about the taste. But that beautiful feeling of kind of being held, being safe in this space, there always being a teapot to go to. Huge gratitude.
So Julia, you have a big story, from overcoming alcohol addiction and stepping away from the corporate world to setting up a globally recognised NGO, and then moving from a much more rational, conventional, conforming way of thinking to a more intuitive and activist approach. So let's kick off this story. What is the NGO Orchid Project, and how did this journey unfold?
Orchid Project is there to ensure that we can all not only dream what sometimes feels like the impossible, but tangibly move towards a world that is a freer, better, more possible place for everyone. So that sounds a lot for an NGO to carry, but my belief and process in setting it up was that we had to dream the impossible. And I had walked the path of my life for many years as a corporate person and an ultra rational kind of climbing career ladder woman. And I had a moment where I chose to do something very, very different. I was working for the world's biggest alcohol producer and marketer. Mm-hmm. I had the biggest expense account in the FTSE 20. And my job was basically to go out and get people pissed, if that's all right to say. I mean, I was paid to do this thing that was so much part of my life and is still so much part of society.
Sounds like it would have been fun.
I lived my best life. I mean, this is what I find extraordinary about life, is in that moment, I was perfectly happy within the sphere of reference that I knew. And it's only now, in my second life, as I call it, looking back, I think, oh my gosh, I wish I'd known. But coming to terms, or even just seeing that addiction, was so hard. And it took me to deep places, to dark places, to a real self-confrontation, because what I found for myself was it was only when I looked in the mirror and saw that woman who was drinking to relieve herself of the pain of life. But it was only until I saw her could I make a choice that isn't who I wanted future Julia to be. As I then began this exploration about what's it like not to drink, I started to look into different ways of healing, whether that was nutrition or therapy or drinking tea instead of alcohol or hydrating, the simplest thing, drink more water. But this very big inquiry that, because I then wasn't masked with booze, I was able to go deeper and deeper. And my one moment, I remember it so vividly. I was in Trafalgar Square and I was celebrating with everyone else because we had just won the Olympic Games against all the odds. And I remember someone handing me a glass of champagne, and I had this moment, do I take it or do I stick to being sober? And I didn't take it, but I went home that night and I cried because I was involved in transport in London, and I just thought, I'm going to be doing transport for the next 7 years. And the next day in the office was the extraordinary moment on the 7th of July, 2005, which were the London bombings.
Yeah. Wow.
And as I walked all the way home with thousands of others on the streets of London that night, I said to myself, what would it say on my gravestone if that had been me on the number 30 bus?
Life happens fast, and we've been building for many years our pace, and so I'm sure there are plenty of people listening going, well, I have a glass of wine every night, or I have a glass, like we share a bottle of wine on the weekend, and at what point does something all these strategies can be used as numbing, right? They're the way, or like the kind of smoothing over of a rough day. How many of us would get home and open a bottle of wine at the end of the commute, just when we used to commute, just to kind of smooth over the edges. And when we do that in a way, there's a sense of like it numbs down the things we're feeling and enables us to kind of maybe not feel that mushy thing that you're talking about, that you can feel and then listen to the intuition within. So it feels like quite a courageous thing to say, okay, I'm not going to drink anymore. And I'm just wondering, like, when you talk about it as an addiction, what do you mean by that? Like, what did it look like for you?
For me, it was the glue that held everything together.
Yeah.
So I didn't have to drink every night, but I had to know where my next drink was. Mm-hmm. So even going home knowing that there was a half open bottle of wine or a beautiful single malt, which I have many, that was the bedrock of what could ease me through not only my social interactions, but my interaction with myself. I say I didn't need to drink every night. I did drink every night. And I got to a point where I was drinking to go to sleep because I felt that was the most relaxing thing. I had an entire narrative around I deserve a drink to relax. And so I built it and built it and built it. And what I would say to anyone who's thinking about any sort of addiction, whether it's food, sex, booze, social media, do the mirror test. Just do the mirror moment. Look at yourself deeply, deeply, and say, is this serving me?
When do we take the time to actually just take a breath and even relate to ourselves in that way and say, you know, in that question of, is this serving me? Can be quite a scary question, because when we start to realize that something we're doing or something we're relating to or a way of life isn't serving us, that can open a can of worms, right? A big can of worms. And I wonder, like, how, when you did make that choice, like, how did you navigate it?
Such beautiful questions, Rachel. Thank you. And this is another theme actually that's kind of flowed through so much of the last 15 years. It's one step at a time. It's only ever the next breath.
It's quite difficult to do that though, Julia. You know, like sometimes sometimes we need to know the plan. We need to know like what's going to happen when and when and when and when and when. Or certainly that used to be my mindset. It's definitely changed in the last years. But that step, just knowing one more step, is quite a scary place to be.
It is. And I won't sugarcoat that. I think it can be terrifying, right?
Yeah.
So there I am with my body kind of breaking, and then this moment of what's it going to say on my gravestone, and realizing I had to step away from the corporate world. I just could not continue to do something with so little meaning. And that was very tough. Giving up a salary, giving up an identity. I was my business card for so long. And I guess that moving into these other much more liminal spaces that ask these questions, who am I? It's an existential thing. And thank God I was able to access therapy, which I think is a privilege because it's not cheap. But also there's a taboo around therapy, I think, as well. But
there is
opened up.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I used to commute to Canary Wharf, and with one of my good friends who will remain nameless, and she used to sit with reading like self-help books behind the metro so no one could see. because back then it was taboo, you know, like if you were doing any kind of work around your emotional well-being, your mental health, there was something not right with you. And seeing how that conversation has morphed over the last 10 years into something which is much more, I think it still has its taboo, but, you know, especially in the past year, has become much more primary as a need for us to be able to talk about therapy and the benefits of how we access it. Because when you start asking these big questions like, who am I? Then the next one's going to be like, what on earth am I doing here? And with that, you do start to have potential access to bigger questions, and it's great to be able to have some kind of support around it. But the world of therapy is kind of also like this unknown space for many of us when we first step into it. How did you meet therapy, and what has been your experience of it?
So it won't surprise you to hear I kind of followed my intuition. So I'd had one friend said to me, when you leave London First, which was the organization I worked for, it's going to be like stepping off a cliff, and write this in your diary, like on that day. And she drew a little picture of someone falling off a cliff, and then on the next page was someone with a parachute. And I literally got to that day and was like, oh my gosh. And
what a great friend.
I know, right?
Yeah.
And she'd recommended a style of therapy that had suited her. So just this demystification of a valued, trusted person in my life. And then the next moment I was reading something, and at the back there was a little advert saying, this is the style of therapy I practice. Call me for, and it was the same thing. So, and that was my first therapist. And I mean, it's just this sense of opening up and trusting it's so different to the world of, as I say, rational thinking that I'd spent the first half of my life doing, of like you say, having the plan, having the knowing where the mortgage is being paid from, knowing their health insurance is there, and like all of this safety that frankly I'd bought. This is what I threw my money at. And
you'd outsourced it all outside of you as well. So there were all these things external that were keeping you secure. And it sounds like you moved into a place where you started to move inside out rather than outside in. And
very beautiful.
And in this inside out place, you started to listen to something. I'm curious about that bridge between the two, because like, was it as simple for you as just going, I'm not going to do that anymore and I'm going to start listening within? Or was the therapy part of that process? Or how did you cultivate that shift, external to internal?
I think I started, totally. To me, you are.
Listeners, I hope I'm making sense. I'm pulling lots of faces and throwing my arms around here. But we're like essentially talking about this. How do we like place our security outside of us to how do we start to listen inside of us, and that shift within?
As I asked myself, who am I in this world? What's it going to say on my gravestone?
Yeah.
What came back was, you have a soul path. So, and I can't tell you how much I didn't want to hear that. You know, I wanted to hear you have a career, or you have, a happy relationship. You're going to be a wife and a mum, or all the stuff we kind of latch onto. I didn't hear that. I heard you have a precious soul path, and you need to be of service. So in Ethiopia, I had a moment when I read more about the scale of FGC within Ethiopia, and you know, as a good feminist, I'd always known about the practice, but I'd read Alice Walker and goodness knows what, but I just assumed something had shifted. And so this moment of reading about 75% of all girls in Ethiopia being cut landed so strongly with me. And equally, I know that I did everything I could to look away. I was filled with a sense of burden, of shame, of not understanding, of judgment, even, but most of all, just a sense of how terrifying. I don't want to look at this. I don't want to walk towards this. And you'll know what I'm about to say. It just came into my life in so many different ways. I found the next month I was having conversations with people. I was reading about it in books. I was seeing it. And I had another kind of Damascus moment with two little girls in the north of the country. I was traveling, and my instinct was to rescue them, was to kind of say, look, try and talk to their parents about not cutting them. And as soon as that thought came in, I knew I couldn't do that because I didn't have language. It was a real Western rescuer mindset. But I kind of let those two girls walk away. And in that space, I remember it so vividly. I just said, I don't know what I can do, but I will do whatever I can to end female genital cutting.
Wow. I'm covered in goosebumps here, Julia. And again, with tears in my eyes, thinking, what about those little girls and that call forth that you had, and as a fellow woman of the world, being like, how shocking actually it is to hear what other women are going through around the world, and that feeling of helplessness that comes where you kind of naturally want to do something or rescue or fix, but also like the recognition, and I've learned this through speaking to you and Molly and Ruthie, is like, it's not our job as like someone who's not in it to dive in and fix. Our job is something different, and to also broker some kind of understanding as well around like these different ways of living that happen around the world, and how do we support other women in other places.
And I knew that come January 2010, I had to get back into the corporate world. I just had to look after myself.
Yeah. And do you let go of your dream when you do that?
Here I am going, I made this vow in the red soil of Ethiopia to do this. And I'm literally having to say I did all I can. I mean, it was a really, really low point. And I'd got this temping job on reception of a friend's company, which was also quite not eating humble pie, but it was very real. And the day I was meant to get up and go to work for him, it was a snow day in London. So all of London shut, as we always do when it snows. And he called up and said, I'm sorry, this isn't going to work out. And I remember putting the phone down and crying because it's just like, I can't even answer the phones in someone's room. What am I going to do? And 2 hours later, I got an email, and it was from the organizers of a competition that I'd entered before Christmas. And I thought I had no chance in this competition. It was so absurdly competitive, but I'd been shortlisted. And
what was the competition?
Well, and against every single odds, I went on to win this competition.
Yeah.
Because of the snow day, I didn't have work, so I could throw myself into winning this competition, which I did. And the prize was, with 3 days' notice, to go to the World Economic Forum in Davos. And I mean, weirdly, Davos, if people don't know about it, it is the most bizarre gathering, frankly, of world leaders.
Could you explain a little bit about it so the listeners know? Like,
yeah,
I mean, actually just Google it, listeners. I mean, essentially it is an annual gathering that happens, isn't it, in Switzerland every year? And it's a representation of world leaders and key companies and businesses around the world, isn't it? And you have to be a member to attend.
And it costs thousands to attend, and it's kind of the most absurd patriarchal setup in the world. Patriarchal, frankly, corporate capitalist setup. And my whole film was, we've got to talk about vaginas at the World Economic Forum.
Brilliant.
And the world kind of voted for me to go there. And it was so many parts of this journey have this dreamlike quality to them.
What happened though? Like, listeners, I'm literally trying to crawl through the screen right now. So you won the competition to go to the World Economic Forum. What happened when you got there?
So I get there. This is all on my website. I've got YouTube video after YouTube video, because it was a YouTube competition. They put on this debate and discussion just on ending female genital cutting.
Yeah.
But each day they followed this activist and her journey. So there are these little mad films of me running after Bill Gates down a corridor and kind of elbowing this woman out of the way, and then turning and seeing it's Melinda Gates and kind of having this conversation, a very similar, very embarrassing conversation with Bill Clinton, where again I'm talking to him, and you can see him just doing everything he can to avoid me until I say the magic words, I've won a YouTube competition. And he looks around and sees the camera and just totally switches it up. And I mean, I think a few things. One was I'd been so afraid of talking about such a taboo subject in this way. And in fact, it was the opposite. Everyone I approached wanted to know, what do you want me to do? Yeah. What can I do to serve this cause? And these were prime ministers. These were people at the, I'm not saying others are not at the top of their game, but people who should have been running away from this conversation wanted to know more. And the second thing was, on my panel discussion was the head of UNICEF. And she said to me afterwards, Julia, I think I need to write to this woman called Molly Melching and introduce you. And of course, I had known about Tostan's work and Molly's work, and I'd been trying to connect with her, and it just hadn't worked out. But then with that introduction, I was able to go and frankly sit and absorb from Molly so much about what she knows and her wisdom and the communities. And that also changed my dialogue, my ability to look at change and see what I wanted to create and how to be part of it.
Incredible. I mean, it's such an incredible story. I mean, I feel like I want us to have hours and hours together. Maybe we need to do like a bigger tea with you and Molly and Ruth and some others, and bring a group of women together so we can like dig into it more. I'm so curious about how, in some ways, like you surrendered to life, like that you talk about this liminal space where you like surrendered into like just allowing life to come up and meet you in some way, and how courageous and bold and colorful and alive your journey sounds like it has been and is, even with all of the challenges. Here's that bit at the end of the podcast. Thank you for listening to 40 for Tea and the entire episode. If you're the kind of person that likes to help others, then please share this with your friends and family and on social too. Like, subscribe, all that jazz. And would you pop over to iTunes and write a review? A good one, mind. It just makes it a bit easier for others to then find this podcast too. And if you want to connect with me, I'd love to hear from you. You can find out more about my programs, my story, and 40 for Tea on rachallan.com. That's RACHALLAN.com. And join me, same time, same place next week with another great cup of tea.